Hi everyone, this is Dr. Liz, and you're listening to Include with Dr. Liz. This show is about everyone, all people, including you. It's about people and their diverse lived experience in this world. I chat with guests to get to know them, their identities, and their inclusion needs, so we all have an opportunity to understand how best to include them, so together we can create a world where everyone thrives. Lara is a blue cheese hating, conflict avoiding, weekend dining and show going, yoga instructing, intuitive eating counselor. With a huge heart, Lara is driven, loyal and loving, on a mission to help thousands of people heal their relationship with food and their body. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you.
It's fabulous to have you here today. We were just chatting offline that Lara is in Dallas, and we were just talking about weather. Is it, as an Australian, I'm always curious about the weather in different cities across the US. So a little bit naff. But Lara, I want to ask you, what led you to be an intuitive eating counselor?
Yeah, I'll give the abridged version because it is a rather long journey. The backstory is basically that I am a musician and an athlete. My body was my instrument. It was my tool to play sports. And I did these things all through college, graduate school, and realized that I didn't really know much about specifically nutrition, but also outside of organized sports. I was like, I don't really know how to work out. I don't know what to do. And that led me to doing my first nutrition certification. So I was a quote unquote nutrition coach for a short amount of time until I realized that we think that our issue with food is that we don't know what to eat. The reality is that we don't know how to listen to our bodies. We don't trust our bodies to tell us what they need. And so the real flex is relearning, I should say, how to interpret the messages that our body is giving us, how to trust that those messages are indeed correct. Because we're all born intuitive eaters.
Mhm.
And then our culture kind of takes us out of being able to trust ourselves and our bodies. And so once I saw that my clients were kind of hitting a wall, so to speak, in their health, I started digging deeper, and that's what led me to becoming a certified intuitive eating counselor and board certified health and wellness coach. And so now I get to do much more holistic, deeper healing with my clients that is not only more rewarding for me, but much more impactful for them.
Well, if I was to draw any sort of understanding to my past experience, I remember when I was pregnant, particularly with my son, that the smell of dirt smelled delicious to me. Now, I'll be very clear, I was never about to go and eat a pile of dirt. But for instance, if I was going through the fresh food section of the grocery store and I'd go past the unwashed potatoes, like I'd be like,
Mm.
and then when I looked into it, apparently it was the potassium in the soil that my body was craving. So the solution to
Interesting.
that would be, coconut water or bananas. And then you can sort of work out. And there is my clue, listening to the body and going, okay, body's telling you something.
Uh-huh. That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bodies are really smart.
they are pretty smart, aren't they? And also they're telling you when they don't like something. So I'm intolerant
Yes.
to a lot of foods.
Hmm.
Um, and while I can get away with them on their own, if I have multiple intolerances together, then they present as an allergy. So, you've got to, you can listen, it's telling you something. And in fact, we will move on to nutrition specifically shortly. Okay, just like every other guest from a long list of identities, you picked four. What were they for you?
Female, LGBTQ slash alphabet mafia, ethnic minority, and religious minority.
Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about today how all those things intersect for you. And I also think sometimes it's really useful to know where people are, because that the geography can have a lot to do with how your lived experience is experienced.
Mhm.
So let's go through them. LGBTQI plus, as alphabet mafia, as you said. um, that's a really diverse community in itself. So out of that, how do you identify specifically?
So this one is very complex for me because I actually have never been the kind of person that needs or likes labels or boxes. And I say this not to say that there's anything wrong with that. I know there are a lot of people who love the labels and it's a huge part of their identity. And for me, I just feel like I am a human who is attracted to certain qualities in other humans, and their gender doesn't really matter to me. So, for the sake of people's brains who are now like, wow, that told me nothing, and I'm even more confused, the labels that other people like to give me are either bisexual or pansexual.
Okay.
I don't feel called to categorize myself as either.
Mhm.
And
Look, I need to say thank you for sharing that, because
yeah.
that fits for so many people. In some people are adopting the term queer to try to describe what you're saying, that it's not being one thing or another, it's just sort of not straight.
Mhm.
um, but thank
Yeah.
you for the label, and a label isn't necessary for you, and I loved how you frame it, what other people assign to you.
Mhm.
hmm that's one of my issues with the diversity label, that it requires someone to, what do I see in you, I'm going to label you based on my frame of reference, not yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will also say, because I do think it's important to the conversation, that I'm a cis het female married to a cis het male. And so part of, I think, this conversation today is around what I kind of think of as hidden identities. Like, no one's going to look at me and be like, she's dated women before. Right. And I've even had, when I was dating women, I had people tell me, well, you don't look like a lesbian. And I'm like, there are so many things I could respond to that, like, first of all, I'm not. Second of all, what exactly do you think that lesbians look like?
Mhm.
And how is that not me? Which comes back to what you were just saying about other people projecting their own need for labels so that things make sense inside their brain, which I understand. And maybe we can move away from needing to do that.
Let's just focus on people's inclusion needs and support them to thrive. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
that's my mission in life. Okay, so what about ethnic minority and religious minority? How do you define that for yourself?
Yeah. So this one, depending on who you ask, is not so invisible. I am ethnically Jewish, half, I will say, which is also complex because technically our Judaism is passed through our maternal side, and my dad is Jewish. So some people will say I am not Jewish at all. Other people will say, well, you're 50% Jewish if your dad is Jewish. So ethnically, if people know my maiden name, which is Wasserman, it is a very Jewish last name. If they put that with looking at me, they're like, oh yeah, she's totally a Jew. But other people walking around are like, she's a white chick with curly hair, right? And so again, I don't necessarily fit in a box. Religiously, I am not Jewish. I was raised, I guess, going to a Unitarian Universalist church, but really, I think identify with maybe agnostic. Like, again, this is a place where I don't feel like there's a clear box that I could put myself into, which I think in and of itself makes me a religious minority and an ethnic minority.
I want to go back to the ethnic minority, in the context of Jewish, and someone that's come from Australia. Very, very small Jewish population. There is one, but very small in contrast to those that immigrated across to the US. Now, here's what's interesting. I think we talk about Jewish as a religion,
Mm.
and you shared it with us as an ethnicity. So, for people that are listening and they went, hang on, I thought Jewish was a religion.
Mm.
Can you, in your own words, and no one's going to hold you to account for it, it's just from your point of view, how is Jewish an ethnicity in your mind?
Yeah. Well, so being Jewish is an ethnicity. Like it is not something where well, let me say this. It is both an ethnicity and a religion. Anyone can religiously convert to Judaism. The same way that anyone can go get baptized or confirmed or whatever and be Catholic or Christian or whatever, right? That is Judaism as a religion. Judaism as an ethnicity is literally groups of people, Sephardic Jews or Ashkenazic Jews, who lived ethnically in a place in the world and have now, just like all other, ethnicities, dispersed.
Yeah.
And so this is where ethnically, like my DNA is my DNA. I got some DNA from my dad, some from my mom, and Ashkenazi Jew is a big part of my ethnicity. But religiously, I was not mitzvahed. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, when you turn 13, you have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. I did not do that. So religiously, I am like not at all Jewish.
I think you've explained it so well, really simply and so well, right? So if we say I'm from, because I have done my ancestry DNA, wanting something super cool to come out of it, but the fact that I knew that there was a convict that came from the UK and was sent to Australia in my hereditary line, and my paternal grandfather had a Scottish accent, right? So he moved here from Scotland. So I deep down knew it wasn't very exciting, but I know ethnically I'm Caucasian. I present with characteristics and physical traits that don't contradict with that.
Mm.
And so similarly, we might say people stereotype people that look Jewish because there are certain characteristics,
Mhm.
right? So that's where I'm just trying to draw that comparison for people. And I
Yeah.
loved how you said you can make a choice to follow a religion, whether you choose to be Muslim, Jewish,
Mhm.
Catholic, you can choose that regardless of your ethnicity. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing for everyone.
Yes. And I'm glad you asked that because honestly, as someone again who was not raised in the Jewish religion, I don't know what I feel like I should know about my ancestry. And so I'm sure other people would explain it better than I would. And I still could have gone on a birthright trip to Israel when I was younger because ethnically that is my right. So yeah, it's very interesting. I don't think that Judaism is the only religion slash ethnicity. I want to say like Muslim is very similar, or some Middle Eastern cultures that also are, you've got a religion and you've got an ethnicity. But yeah, when you're around people who are like, no, I just went to this church, like, what do you mean?
um, which really, this all highlights intersectionality and how it changes your experience in the world, right? And okay, I want to unpack all of this. Okay, so has at any point, your identities, your intersecting identities, played out in a negative way for you? Has it ever sort of presented
Mm,
as a barrier?
yeah. I mean, I feel like as someone who is straight passing and white passing, I still have a lot of privilege. And I think, honestly, when I think of times where there has been a lack of equity or equality, it has honestly mostly been because I am a female and not because I'm Jewish, not because I am not straight. Like, unfortunately, it's just been because
And do
I'm a woman.
you have any examples that you can reflect on, or do you think it's more general?
I think more general, I will say there, I had a bit of I guess you could call it a power struggle at a previous job. I used to be a teacher and a coach, like a athletics coach. And I was coaching softball. I was one of the assistant coaches, and the head coach was this guy who really didn't like boundaries. Let me rephrase. He didn't like when other people set boundaries, or maybe he just didn't like when I set boundaries. But we had a day off of school And this was my first year coaching. I had not received any sort of practice schedule. And I think it was MLK Day. My husband was taking the day off work so that we could celebrate my birthday early. And so I told the head coach that I wasn't going to be there. And he threw a fit and was like, "Well, we have practice." I said, "Well, I didn't know. Like I haven't been given a practice schedule." And he's like, "Well, we always practice this day." And I was like, "I have not coached before." Like I literally had no way of knowing any of this. So a couple of days later, the athletics director sent me an email that was like, "Hey, come to my office. I have good news for you." And I was like, "What?" Okay. So I go to his office and he was like, "Hey, we're actually going to switch you over to being a tennis coach." And I was like, "Excuse me? Like, I did not sign up to be a tennis coach. I played college softball. Why is this happening?" He's like, "Well," and basically some like demeaning, "Oh, we heard that this was a lot for you to handle with the rigorous softball practices. And so, tennis doesn't practice as much. The stakes aren't as high." And I'm an anger crier. So I start crying, which like it's always the worst time. I'm like, the time I'm trying to be tough. I'm gonna fucking cry right now. I hope I can say bad words.
Yes.
Otherwise, cut it out. Okay. And then he made it worse by saying something to the effect of, he got really awkward and he was like, "Well, I'm a football coach. We don't have tissues in here." Like just so demeaning and like macho man. And I was like, none of this was handled well. And I have a feeling that a lot of this situation is because I was speaking up to a male athletics coach and athletics director. And it's like, y'all go to therapy or something. Like, you don't need to take this out on me.
And they say we end up going to therapy because of the people that should have gone to therapy.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, I'm curious, did you end up coaching tennis or
I
softball?
I did coach tennis. It was fine. The kids were great. I mean, I
Did it
had a
maybe
couple.
maybe it was saving you from having to work with that guy more?
I mean, honestly, probably. I did have a couple of the softball girls that were like, "We're going to do tennis next year because you're way cooler than the other coach." I was like, "Thanks." Yeah, so I did coach tennis. I ended up leaving that school altogether because there was a whole host of stuff.
Is
But
okay. Now you already mentioned a little earlier around how you'd leverage your identities to represent and highlight the importance of representation and speaking out. I do want to, before I go there on the representation thing, there was something that you said around safety. And I found
mm,
this really interesting. So, of course, it makes sense. You're in a conversation with other people that identify outside the bell curve, I guess is a good way to describe it. So you feel safe. Like you feel like, well, they're not going to question it because they see me not questioning it and all that.
mhm,
And I know that we have these months or days or weeks of celebration throughout the year to bring attention to different identities. And from my point of view as a transformation, organizational transformation expert in inclusion, I'm always like, no, you spend so much time focusing on the, cupcakes and celebrations and not changing something.
yeah.
Something really important that you highlighted around that month, because you're saying there's more dialogue, there's more consciousness around it, that people are, I don't know, better at self-managing, like holding them to selves to account because it's more conscious. So it allows you that safety to share it. I haven't really tied those two together before. So
Mm,
thank you for sharing that. That
yeah.
I like that.
Well, and sorry to cut you off. I think it's also like when everyone's talking about it, you're normalizing it.
Mm,
And so people who are normally going to skip past my Instagram stories if I start talking about something in September or whatever, right? Like, whatever, I'm not here for that. If they're being blasted with messages And they're like, oh, a lot of my friends are posting about this, or oh, there are a lot of rainbow flags around town. Like I feel like there's a little bit of it's almost like exposure therapy, right? Like they're seeing it over and over and over. And so I think that subconsciously
Yeah.
they're more receptive. Now I'm talking about people who live in the middle. I'm not talking about the people who are throwing tirades in Target because of a gay shirt or whatever, right? Like not those people, but the people who are kind of like, nah, I don't know about all this. I feel like they're more receptive. And so because the visibility is higher, I also just think it's more people are going to see it when I share it
Yeah.
during that time than if I were to do it today.
Yeah, such a good point, which then brings us back on the loop to representation and why representation matters, whether it's flags or whether it's people standing up and saying, this is me,
Hmm.
or seeing them in the hierarchy, right? Seeing them in influential positions and taking ownership of their authentic self and presenting that to the world in their roles. All of those things matter.
Hmm.
Um, do you see yourself represented? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it something that yeah,
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question. And I haven't thought about that because if no one's talking about it, then I don't know. Right. My husband is black. He's mixed. Mom was white, dad was black. But when people look at him, they see that he's not white. Right. And so I think it's an interesting dance when you are someone who is a part of these communities, but people can't see it. And I do think that, like, again, me talking about it causes other people to talk about it. I had no idea that my friend had been hooking up with a woman for a year,
mm,
right? Because she hadn't talked about it. And it's like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's great for her. And I really like her and she inspires me and her business inspires me. And so maybe that is a version of representation that I wouldn't have known had I not shared. I will also say that it can be tricky to talk about because I I don't see this a lot that people leverage their identities in a way of like in like a capitalistic way. You know what I mean? Like I don't see a lot of people doing that and I don't ever want it to seem like I'm doing that. And so, does that make sense? What I'm saying? Like my husband, I don't know whether he's joking or not, but he's like, you should put all over your like website and stuff that you're like a Jewish LGBTQ plus owned business. And I'm like, that feels weird to me because, and he's like, why? It's true. I'm like, well, yeah, it is true. And I think that there are people who might see that as trying to leverage
right.
my identities to make a buck.
Mhm.
And at the same time, if I look at my client roster, it's not a bunch of straight white people. And I think there's a reason for that. Again, because they feel safe. So it's tricky. And it's like, okay, but if I did say that, then if you ask someone else that question, do you see yourself being represented? Maybe more people would say yes.
It's a tightrope. I
Yes.
I mean, you threw in another sort of potentially interesting variable. So if you're married to someone that presents as a person of color, and you said earlier in our conversation, you acknowledged your white presenting, straight presenting privileges. I'm curious. Like, there's this conversation that must ensue, like, because I know myself, if I was with someone that's a person of color, regardless of gender, there's a different conversation that we're having about inclusion. Then you bring gender into the equation, and in your case, your husband has the masculine identity versus your female identity. So I'm just really curious. Does it unfold in any ways where there's conversation around diversity and inclusion and who's got more privilege over the other?
Honestly, no. Like we just hang out with people we like. And it's kind of the same dynamic between the two of us. Like we never really talked about it. I think early on when we were dating, I did mention that I had dated women because if he wasn't going to be cool with that, obviously that was like, okay, bye. Like, I need to know that you're cool with it. And he was like, okay. Like, he did not care at all. Um, and I mean, the conversations we have are more just like general curiosity, right? So one of them is people look at household income statistics by race.
Yeah.
Well, are we a white household or a black household?
Interesting.
Right? So we'll talk about things like that where it's like, well, technically we're 75% or like 50% white, 25% Jewish, 25% black. So like, does white win? Like that's the majority because you're half white and I'm half white. Like we have conversations like that that like don't really matter, but they're
Yeah,
interesting.
because if that's because those are those form filling out where all the numbers are being collated. No, I think it does matter because and that's again the labels that are being assigned to us,
Yes.
right? And then we have to fit into these boxes. So I hear you because
Yeah.
in my context, moving across from Australia to here, we don't have a race box. Look, it's like when I had my first form that I had to fill out here, I read it like, what color is your skin? Like, that's how confronting I found that question. Saying,
Yeah.
is it
Interesting.
white? Is it black? Is it? And I'm like, I, and I understand, oh, look, I get racial exclusion, discrimination, inequities. I get it all. But the way I was so confronted by it because I'd never seen myself through the lens of race. Yes, to
Mm,
ethnicity, right? I know where my ethnicity comes from, but never had a race discussion because it's not construct that we use across Australia and much of the world. It's a North American
interesting.
construct. So you would say you're Australian, and then if ethnicity came up, it'd be like, oh yeah, well I'm Asian, or I'm African, or
Huh.
you're not white Australian, or Asian Australian, or black Australian. Like that doesn't even. It
Interesting.
sounds weird to say it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I could see you thinking really hard about how to even say it. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why it was so confronting. It felt like you're asking what color's my skin.
Yeah.
But anyway, now as part of the guest questionnaire, and we are getting to the end. So as part of the guest questionnaire, I like to ask how people's inclusion needs are currently being met and then, the importance of them thriving. And under your current state, it's interesting. I see that we talked about seeing yourself represented. So that's cool. But my history, identity, and beliefs are respectfully considered by the people I work with in the community I live in. And you went neutral on that, right? On your current state. Why so?
So I actually found some of those specifically work related questions kind of challenging to answer because my full time job, I work for myself.
Yeah.
So I'm choosing I'm literally handpicking my clients. Like it's great, right? I have a couple of jobs outside, more of like we'll call them side hustles. I teach yoga classes, I coach F45, I do some singing. And so I was trying to think about like, okay, in those communities, how do I feel? And I'm
Mm.
thinking about how one place I work, um, posted this really beautiful reel about MLK Day, and a lot of our Black instructors were featured just sharing about what it means to them. And a message from our manager that was like, hey, if you have any like favorite MLK quotes that you want to use in your classes this week, we would love that. Right. And then none of this relates to my own identity, but I'm just thinking about in general. Meanwhile, like another place I work at, we didn't change our class schedule. There was no acknowledgement that it was MLK Day. Like things were just moving along as per usual. And so they're very different. And so I think a lot of my answers were like, well, I'll just click the neutral one because it
Because
really depends on what specific place I'm thinking of. Like in some instances, I think any and all of my identities would be met with love and support. In other places, people would be like, wow, you're really weird. Which
and
is really weird. I'm an Aquarius, like we are by nature very weird, but you know what I'm saying.
I it's one of those things that I myself see it as a privilege that I've been self-employed for coming on 2 decades. And there have been times in my life that I probably wouldn't have been able to manage through them if I was an employee because my need wouldn't have been accommodated. So I do really recognize the privilege I have of choosing what I do when I do it to some degree. I mean, within reason of client deliverables, of course. But here was one that I found as an outlier that I'm curious to ask.
Okay.
Under the importance to thrive. So I ask, like, if this, do you need this to thrive? And on that, my contribution is valued by others. You
Hmm.
didn't agree. I mean, you didn't disagree, but you're like, no, I don't really need that.
I think that probably stemmed from the same sort of like, well, we're at like in my business, yeah, what I do 100% needs to be valued or no one's going to hire me. Right. And in other situations, I think it's like, if I know what I'm doing is valuable, I don't really care if you acknowledge it. So I think that's probably where that stemmed from.
I mean, there is a level of self efficacy in you that not everybody's going to have, right? Like you own who you are. And so clearly you can rationalize that. You go, well, that sucks to be you if you don't value what I've
Basically.
That's the vibe I'm getting, Lara.
Yeah, and like, let me also say, because of my work situation, that can be the case, right? If I were fully employed by someone else and my, livelihood, my income, my ability to be promoted, my ability to keep my job were dependent on other people acknowledging my value, that would be a very different situation.
Fair call. Fair call. Um, so we've dipped in and out of how you're bringing your magic to the world, aside from F45 and yoga. So tell me about what you're doing with your clients now, and I'll make sure all your contact details are in the description if people want to get in contact with you.
Yeah. So honestly, I think my work is very, it overlaps a lot with your work because the root of it is body liberation. And one of I'm saying our because really most people, despite their identities, are oppressed due to diet culture.
Mm.
And so we are playing small, we are under eating, which we don't have energy, we don't have brain space, we can't understand complex conversations because we're starving and our body and brain aren't getting what they need. And we're distracted because we're trying to lose weight and we're not asking for a promotion and we have low self worth. And it's all tied together. And so my job truly is to help people take their power back so that they have the autonomy to make the best choices for their own body as opposed to letting some app tell them what they're supposed to eat. They're moving in ways that are joyful and make them feel strong and confident instead of moving as a form of punishment or compensation for something that they ate. Like, if we really start to think about the amount of brain space that many of us have given to those thoughts about, oh my God, these clothes look bad on me. I can't even focus on my presentation because I had to go up a size in clothes and not the outfit I wanted to wear didn't fit me. And I need to not eat tomorrow because I don't deserve it. Like it is
Oh,
so much.
I know intimately. I needed you about 10 years ago. I had
Ugh.
extremely disordered eating.
Mm.
Um, And for people listening, that's different to an eating disorder. It was just more obsession around making sure I ate all of the right foods at the right time, right
Yeah.
amount, under the certain amount, on the right balance of macros. Like
Yep.
it was a full-time job on top of my full-time job.
Yes.
Now, if I was to share this with people listening, it goes back to a time when I was in my first marriage and still finding the courage to find myself and the
Mm.
courage to leave. And so it was one thing I could control,
Yep.
and that's why it got out of control.
That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, to me, it means I've taken down. I mean, I had to go to the extent of taking down mirrors out of bedrooms over the years, like because of this dysmorphia that it's
Mm.
now with me. I don't know how to get rid of it, but there are crutches and behavioral economics, I call them, or architectures that I can do to make sure that it doesn't get in the way.
Mhm.
So your work is really needed. I 100% believe that. And anyway, that's another podcast episode. So I don't know. Put that in. Oh, like I'm thinking all the tips. I'm like, okay, so start deleting all of the accounts that make you feel bad about yourself on your
Yeah.
social. You don't have to see it all the time. you
Yep.
know?
Yeah.
And all right, we could go down a rabbit hole, which we don't have time.
Pretty good.
It was such a fabulous conversation with you today, Lara. Thank you for humoring my questions.
Yeah.
We will have all of your contact details in the podcast description so people can get in contact.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is not what I normally talk about, and it was really amazing to be able to share.
Love that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.